You have 10 seconds to open this door before we make the decision for you. The voice cut through the wood like cold metal, firm, practiced, used to being obeyed, and for a moment the entire house seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves understood what was at stake. Naomi Carter stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, the faint chill of it rising through her body, grounding her in a way nothing else could, while the early morning light slipped through the blinds in thin pale lines that stretched across the living room like quiet warnings. Outside, the low hum of idling engines mixed with the soft crackle of police radios, a layered chorus of authority pressing in from every direction. And though she couldn't see them all, she could feel their presence, the weight of numbers, the certainty of people who believed they were in control. 15 deputies surrounded her home, their shadows shifting across the curtains, their silhouettes briefly cutting through the light each time one of them moved. And somewhere near the front porch, a boot scraped against concrete in a slow, impatient rhythm. Naomi didn't move toward the door. She didn't speak. Her eyes drifted instead to the small digital clock on the wall, its red numbers glowing steady and indifferent, marking time in quiet defiance of the chaos gathering outside. The voice came again, sharper now, edged with authority that expected compliance. "Ma'am, this is your final warning." And the word ma'am landed strangely, formal but hollow, like it didn't quite belong to her. Naomi exhaled slowly, her breath controlled, measured, the kind of breathing that came from training, not instinct, and her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the kitchen counter as she turned, not toward the door, but toward a narrow drawer tucked beneath a stack of unopened mail. The house was still, almost unnaturally so, no television humming, no footsteps above or below, just the faint ticking of the clock and the distant murmur of men preparing to act. A beam of light shifted as a cloud passed overhead, dimming the room for a second, and in that brief shadow, Naomi pulled the drawer open. Inside, nestled between old receipts and a folded instruction manual, sat a small, matte black device, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it was, its surface cool and smooth as her fingers closed. Around it, outside, a command was murmured, too low to make out, followed by the subtle repositioning of bodies, the tightening of a perimeter. Naomi lifted the device, her thumb hovering over its side as she listened, not to the noise outside, but to the silence within herself, steady and unbroken. The house didn't feel like a place under threat. It felt like a place waiting. Another second passed, then another. Somewhere beyond the door, a hand knocked again, harder this time, the sound echoing through the frame and into the walls. But Naomi had already turned away, already stepped deeper into the room, the light catching the edge of her face as her expression remained calm, unreadable, and completely unafraid. Naomi's thumb pressed gently against the side of the device, not activating it yet, just feeling the familiar edge, the slight indentation worn into the surface as if it had been used more times than it ever should have been. And for a brief moment her gaze drifted past it, past the drawer, past the quiet kitchen, to a memory that did not belong to this house at all, a room filled with low blue light and steady screens. Voices speaking in calm, coded phrases, the kind of place where decisions were made without raised voices, yet carried weight across entire regions, and her shoulders subtly adjusted as if remembering a posture she had not used in years. Outside, a different kind of rhythm was building, boots repositioning, radios chirping, a short burst of static followed by a clipped voice confirming positions, each sound layered with the confidence of people who believed the situation was already under control. And somewhere near the front, a deputy exhaled audibly, the faint scrape of fabric suggesting someone shifting their stance, waiting for an order that had not yet been given. Naomi stepped further into the living room, the sunlight catching the edge of a framed photograph on the wall, its glass reflecting a brief flash of her silhouette as she passed. And for a second she paused, not because of fear, but because of recognition, the image showing a younger version of herself standing straighter, eyes sharper, dressed in a uniform that never made it into conversations with neighbors or small talk at the grocery store. The knock came again, louder this time, more force behind it, but still measured, still contained, like someone holding back the full weight of what they could do. And that restraint spoke louder than any shouted command, because it meant they were close to crossing a line they assumed they had the right to cross. Naomi lowered her gaze back to the device in her hand and turned it over, her fingers steady, her breathing unchanged, while the digital clock behind her clicked forward another second, then another, each one stretching just enough to make the silence inside the house feel deliberate rather than accidental. She moved to the small table near the hallway, placing the device down for just a moment as if aligning herself with something unseen, her eyes scanning the room not for exits or threats, but for confirmation, the quiet order of everything exactly where it should be, the absence of panic almost louder than the noise outside. A voice crackled through a radio just beyond the door, louder now, stand by, followed by a pause that hung in the air like a held breath, and Naomi's hand returned to the device, lifting it again with a certainty that had nothing to do with defiance and everything to do with memory. Her thumb hovered once more, this time closer to the activation point, and as the sunlight shifted again across the floor, stretching longer through the blinds, her reflection flickered faintly in the dark screen of the device, calm, composed, and carrying a history no one outside that door had even considered. The voice outside shifted, no longer just firm but sharpened with impatience, and this time it carried a name. Naomi Carter, we have a lawful order, open the door now. And the way her name was spoken felt less like recognition and more like a line read off a page, something gathered without understanding, something used without context. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stood just beyond the front steps, his broad frame squared toward the door, one hand resting near his radio, the other lifting slightly as he signaled the deputies around him to hold position. And though his expression remained controlled, there was a tightening around his eyes that suggested this was not unfolding the way he had expected. He had arrived with certainty, with a file that told a simple story, with the assumption that the woman inside was just another name on a report, but the longer the door stayed closed, the more that certainty began to thin. Around him, the deputies adjusted subtly, boots shifting on gravel, gloved hands resting against belts, radios clipped neatly to their shoulders, emitting low bursts of static that broke the quiet in irregular intervals. And one of them glanced toward Brooks, as if waiting for the next command that would move everything forward. Brooks lifted his radio and spoke in a low, even tone. We are still waiting on compliance. His voice measured, controlled, but carrying the quiet pressure of someone who did not like being made to wait. Inside, Naomi heard every word, not just the commands, but the spaces between them, the pauses that revealed more than the statements themselves. And her grip on the device remained steady as she brought it closer, the faint reflection of her face still visible in its dark surface. She did not rush. She did not react to the urgency outside. Instead, her attention narrowed, the room around her fading into a soft blur of familiar shapes, the table, the chair, the framed photograph, all still and unchanged, while her focus settled entirely on the small object in her hand. Brooks took a step closer to the door, the wooden porch creaking faintly under his weight, and knocked again, this time with a controlled force that echoed deeper into the house. This does not need to escalate, he called out, his tone shifting slightly, attempting reason, attempting authority wrapped in calm. But beneath it there was something else, a hint of irritation at a situation slipping outside his script. A deputy to his left leaned in slightly, speaking just low enough that only Brooks could hear. Sir, we can proceed. And Brooks gave a small shake of his head, his gaze fixed on the door as if willing it to open, as if expecting the person inside to finally act like every other person he had encountered in situations like this. Inside, Naomi's thumb finally moved, pressing against the activation point with a quiet, deliberate motion, and the device responded with a soft, almost inaudible click, followed by a faint glow that spread across its surface, subtle but unmistakable. The sound was small, contained entirely within the room, but its significance stretched far beyond it, and Naomi lifted it slightly, bringing it closer to her ear, her posture straightening just a fraction, her expression unchanged. Outside, nothing had shifted yet, the deputies still in position, Brooks still waiting, the radios still murmuring, but the balance of the moment had already begun to move, not with noise, not with force, but with a quiet change that no one outside the door could see, not yet. The faint glow from the device steadied, a soft, controlled light that did not flicker or pulse, just remained constant as if it had already connected to something far beyond the quiet walls of the house. And Naomi lifted it fully to her ear, her voice when it came low, clear, and precise. Code Raven 17. Reactivation request. Naomi Carter. Authentication level 4. Each word delivered without hesitation, without strain, like a language she had not spoken in years, yet had never truly forgotten. For a brief second, there was nothing on the other end, just a thin layer of silence that felt different from the silence in the room. Deeper, more intentional, and then a voice responded, calm, neutral, stripped of emotion. Stand by for verification. And Naomi did not move, did not speak again, her eyes resting on the narrow strip of light crossing the floor, as if the entire moment had narrowed to that single line. Outside, Sheriff Brooks shifted his stance again, his patience thinning into something sharper, and he glanced toward one of the deputies who gave a subtle nod, a silent confirmation that they were ready, that the delay had gone on long enough, and Brooks exhaled through his nose before lifting his radio once more. Prepare to proceed, he said quietly, the words carrying just enough weight to ripple through the line of deputies as their posture tightened, their focus narrowing toward the door. A faint metallic click sounded somewhere near the porch as equipment was adjusted, not aggressive, not chaotic, just methodical, practiced, the kind of preparation that came from repetition, and Brooks took one final step forward, his hand rising slightly, as if to signal the exact moment everything would shift. Inside, Naomi remained still, the device warm against her ear now, and the voice returned, sharper this time, more focused. Authentication confirmed. Status? And for the first time, Naomi's gaze lifted from the floor, her eyes steady, her posture aligning with something unseen yet unmistakable. Local law enforcement attempting forced entry without federal clearance, she said, her tone unchanged, but the words themselves carried a different weight, one that extended far beyond the house, beyond the street, beyond the deputies gathered outside. There was a pause, shorter this time, followed by a subtle shift in the voice on the line, not louder, not urgent, but more precise. Hold position. Do not disengage. And Naomi gave the smallest nod, a motion so slight it could have been missed entirely, yet it marked a decision already made. Outside, Brooks lowered his hand slightly, just for a fraction of a second, as if something in the air had shifted, though he could not name it, and he frowned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the closed door, sensing resistance that did not match the usual patterns, something quieter, something more controlled. One of the deputies glanced down at his radio, adjusting the volume as a faint burst of static cut through, sharper than before, lingering just a second too long, and he tapped the device lightly, expecting it to clear. It did not. Inside, Naomi lowered the device just enough to look at it, the glow steady, unwavering, and her breathing remained slow, even, untouched by the movement building outside, because the moment had already shifted, not in sound, not in force, but in authority, and though the deputies had not yet realized it, the line they were about to cross was no longer theirs to control. The static did not fade this time. It stretched, thinned, then sharpened into something unnatural, a signal that did not belong to the rhythm of local channels, and one by one the deputies began to notice it, small shifts at first, a glance down, a hand adjusting a dial, a quiet frown forming as their radios carried a tone that lingered just a second too long before cutting off. Sheriff Brooks lifted his own unit closer to his ear, his thumb pressing the side as he tried to clear the line. Dispatch, confirm status, he said, his voice steady but edged with something new, a question that had not been there before, and for a moment there was no response, just a hollow silence where there should have been an answer. A deputy to his right spoke under his breath. Sir, I am getting interference. And another echoed it from further back, their voices low but spreading, a ripple of uncertainty moving through the formation that had stood so solid just minutes ago. Brooks lowered the radio slightly, his gaze returning to the closed door, but now it was different, no longer just an obstacle, no longer just a barrier between authority and compliance, but something else, something he had not accounted for, and his jaw tightened as he stepped back half a pace, reassessing without fully admitting that he needed to. Inside, Naomi stood exactly where she had been, the device still at her ear, the faint glow reflecting softly against her skin, and the voice on the other end returned, more direct now. Maintain position. External channels are being secured, and Naomi's eyes closed for just a brief second, not in relief, not in fear, but in acknowledgement, as if a process she understood completely was unfolding exactly as it should. Outside, the radios flickered again, but this time the sound was clearer, sharper, cutting through the previous static with a tone that commanded attention, and a new voice pushed through, not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakably authoritative. All units on scene, stand by for directive. The words precise, controlled, carrying a weight that did not match the local dispatch system, and the deputies froze, their movements halting as they looked toward Brooks, waiting for him to respond, to correct it, to reassert control. Brooks brought his radio back up slowly, his fingers tightening around it. "Identify yourself," he said, the question measured but firm, and for a brief second there was silence again, the kind that stretched just enough to shift the balance of power in the air. Then the voice returned, unchanged, federal oversight. "You are instructed to hold position and await further instruction." And this time there was no static behind it, no distortion, just clarity, clean and deliberate. A deputy near the back shifted his weight, his eyes moving between Brooks and the others, uncertainty now visible in the small movements of hands, in the way shoulders adjusted, in the absence of the earlier confidence that had filled the space. Brooks did not respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the door, his mind working through possibilities, through scenarios that did not align with what he had been told, and for the first time since arriving, he did not move forward. Inside, Naomi lowered the device slightly, not ending the connection, just enough to let the quiet of the room settle back around her, and the sunlight had shifted again, stretching longer across the floor, illuminating the edges of the furniture, the photograph on the wall, the stillness of a space that had never truly been under threat. Outside, the line of deputies remained in place, but something fundamental had changed, not in their position, not in their numbers, but in their certainty, and the door that had once seemed like the final barrier now stood as a boundary they were no longer sure they had the right to cross. The air settled into a strange kind of quiet, not empty but suspended, like everything outside the house had paused mid-breath without fully understanding why. And Naomi stood in that stillness with the device resting lightly against her hand, no longer pressed to her ear, yet still connected, still alive with a presence that reached far beyond the small living room. The sunlight had shifted again, warmer now, stretching across the floorboards in long golden lines that touched the edge of her feet, and somewhere in the house a faint creak echoed as the structure adjusted to the morning heat, a small, ordinary sound that felt almost amplified against the silence. Outside, no one spoke for a moment. Radios remained in hand, shoulders remained squared, but the movement had drained out of the scene, replaced by hesitation that did not belong to trained response. Sheriff Brooks lowered his radio slowly, his eyes fixed on the front door as if it might offer an explanation, but the wood remained still, unchanged, holding its place between two worlds that no longer aligned. He glanced toward one of his deputies, expecting confirmation, expecting reassurance, but what he found instead was uncertainty mirrored back at him, subtle but undeniable, in the way the deputy's grip shifted on his radio, in the slight narrowing of his eyes as he listened for a signal that was no longer theirs alone. Inside, Naomi moved at last, not with urgency, not with resistance, but with quiet intention, taking a single step toward the window, her gaze lifting just enough to catch the faint outline of figures beyond the curtain, blurred shapes moving slower now, no longer advancing, no longer pressing forward. Her reflection overlapped them in the glass, a layered image of stillness against motion, and for a moment it looked as if she stood among them rather than apart, as if the boundary between inside and outside had softened into something less defined. She raised her hand slightly, not to signal, not to warn, but simply to rest her fingers against the edge of the curtain, the fabric cool beneath her touch, and she did not pull it aside, did not reveal herself, choosing instead to remain unseen, present but not exposed. The device in her other hand emitted a faint tone, soft and controlled, and she brought it back toward her ear, her posture straightening almost imperceptibly as the voice returned, quieter now, but more deliberate. Control has been established. Remain where you are. And Naomi's eyes closed for a brief second, not in reaction, but in alignment, as if acknowledging a shift that had already taken place. Outside, Brooks inhaled slowly, the kind of breath taken when a decision must be made without complete information, and he looked down at his radio again, then back at the door, then finally at the line of deputies behind him, each one waiting, each one holding a position that no longer felt certain. The weight of command settled differently now, heavier, less absolute, and he hesitated, just long enough for the moment to define itself. No one moved forward. No one stepped back. The house stood quiet, unchanged, but the authority surrounding it had begun to unravel, not through force, not through confrontation, but through a silence that no longer belonged to them. The first sign that something had fully shifted did not come from the deputies, nor from the door, but from the radios themselves, as a clean tone cut through every channel at once, sharp and unmistakable, followed by a voice that carried no hesitation, no regional accent, no uncertainty. All local units on scene. This operation is now under federal review. You are ordered to stand down immediately. And this time there was no static, no distortion, only clarity that filled the space like a line drawn across the moment. Sheriff Brooks did not respond right away, his posture stiffening as the words settled in, and for the first time since he had arrived, his authority did not feel like a given. It felt like something being questioned from a level he could not reach. Around him, the deputies shifted, not dramatically, not openly, but enough to break the uniform stillness they had held there. Eyes moving between one another, then back to Brooks, waiting for him to correct it, to push back, to reclaim control. He lifted his radio slowly, pressing the transmit button with measured pressure. This is Sheriff Brooks. Identify your command authority, he said, his voice controlled but carrying an edge that had not been there before, and the response came almost immediately, precise and unyielding. Authority confirmed through Federal Communications Command. Your current action is unauthorized. Stand down. The word unauthorized lingered in the air longer than anything else, heavier than any command he had given that morning, and Brooks felt it settle somewhere deeper than the situation itself. Inside, Naomi stood still, the device lowered slightly now, but her grip on it remained steady, her breathing even, her gaze calm as she listened without reacting, because nothing in that exchange surprised her, nothing in it felt uncertain. The sunlight had shifted again, climbing higher across the walls, illuminating the photograph more clearly now, the image of her past no longer half hidden in shadow, and for a brief moment her eyes moved toward it, not with nostalgia, not with regret, but with quiet recognition of a life that had never truly left her. Outside, one of the deputies spoke quietly, "Sir," just a single word, but it carried a question, and Brooks did not answer immediately, his jaw tightening as he looked back at the door, then at the perimeter, then finally down at his radio again as if expecting it to change. It did not. The voice returned once more, firmer now. This is your final directive. Disengage and withdraw from the property. And this time, there was no room left for interpretation. A long second passed. Then another. Brooks exhaled slowly, the sound controlled but heavier than before, and his shoulders shifted, not collapsing, not conceding, but adjusting to something he could no longer override. He lowered the radio and looked at his team, each of them still waiting, still watching him, and for a brief moment, the silence between them spoke louder than any command. Then, finally, he gave a small nod, barely perceptible, but enough, and the line began to loosen, the formation breaking not in chaos, but in quiet compliance, deputies stepping back, lowering their stance, their movements slower, more deliberate, as if the ground beneath the situation had changed and they were adjusting to it step by step. Inside, Naomi did not move toward the door, did not speak, did not reveal herself. She simply stood where she was, the device now dimming in her hand, the glow fading back into stillness. And in that moment, the house was no longer surrounded by pressure, only by the fading echo of authority that had come too close to crossing a line it did not understand. The movement outside did not happen all at once. It unfolded in small, almost reluctant steps, deputies lowering their radios, shoulders easing out of rigid formation, boots shifting backward across gravel and pavement with a softer sound than before, and the line that had once pressed tightly around the house began to open, creating space where there had been none. Sheriff Brooks remained closest to the door, his position unchanged for a moment longer than the others, as if something in him resisted the final step of disengagement, and his eyes stayed fixed on the wood in front of him, not expecting it to open, but no longer certain what it represented. A deputy approached him quietly from the side, his voice low, careful. "Sir, we are being redirected," and Brooks gave a slight nod, not looking at him, his attention still anchored to the door as though it held an answer he had not yet accepted. Inside, Naomi stood just beyond the curtain, her fingers resting lightly against the fabric, feeling the faint movement of air as the outside pressure shifted, and for the first time since the voices had begun, the house felt like itself again, not a point of focus, not a target, just a place, quiet and steady. The device in her hand had dimmed completely now, its surface dark and reflective once more, and she lowered it slowly, placing it back on the table with the same care she had used to pick it up, as if closing a loop that had never needed explanation. Outside, Brooks finally stepped back, just a single pace, but it changed the distance between him and the door in a way that could not be undone, and he lifted his radio again, his voice lower now, more measured. "All units, clear the perimeter," he said, the words simple, controlled, but carrying a weight that was different from his earlier commands, less about control and more about acknowledgement. The deputies responded without question, moving in coordinated but quieter motions, returning to their vehicles, their presence dissolving from the edges of the property, and the low hum of engines began to rise again, this time signaling departure instead of arrival. One by one, the vehicles pulled away, tires rolling slowly down the street, the sound fading into the distance until it blended with the ordinary rhythm of the neighborhood, leaving behind only the echo of what had almost happened. Brooks lingered a moment longer, his hand resting against his radio, his gaze drifting once more to the door, and though he did not speak, something in his expression shifted, not fully understood, not fully resolved, but altered enough to remain with him. Then he turned, stepping away from the house, his boots quieter now, his posture no longer rigid with certainty, and he walked toward his vehicle without looking back. Inside, Naomi moved away from the window, her reflection slipping out of the glass as she crossed the room, and the sunlight followed her in soft lines across the floor, illuminating the space that had remained unchanged through it all. She did not rush to the door. She did not check the locks. She simply paused in the center of the room, her breathing steady, her shoulders relaxed, and the silence that settled around her was not empty. It was complete, holding within it the quiet confirmation that the moment had passed and the line had held. The house remained still long after the last engine sound had faded, the quiet settling into the walls, into the floor, into the thin lines of sunlight that now stretched fully across the room, warm and unbroken, and Naomi stood there for a moment without moving, as if allowing the silence to complete itself before she did anything else. The air felt different now, lighter, not because anything inside had changed, but because what had surrounded it was gone, leaving behind only the steady rhythm of an ordinary morning. She walked slowly toward the table where the device rested, its surface now dark and inactive, reflecting only the room around it, and she placed her hand beside it, not picking it up, not needing to, just acknowledging its presence before turning away. In the corner, the framed photograph caught more light than before, the image clear now, a younger Naomi standing in uniform. Posture straight, eyes focused, a version of her that had never fully disappeared, only stepped back into quiet. She paused there, her gaze resting on it for a brief second, not lingering, not revisiting, just recognizing it as part of what had carried her through moments like this without ever needing to be explained. A faint breeze moved through the slightly open window, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to let it sway gently, the fabric brushing softly against the glass, and the sound was small, almost imperceptible, but it filled the room more than the voices ever had. Naomi moved toward the kitchen, her steps unhurried, her shoulders relaxed, and she reached for a glass, turning on the faucet as water flowed in a steady, familiar stream, the sound grounding, ordinary, untouched by everything that had just unfolded outside. She took a sip, then set the glass down, her fingers resting lightly against the counter as she looked out toward the window again, not searching for anything, not expecting anything, just observing the stillness that remained. The street beyond had returned to its usual rhythm, distant traffic, a passing car, a neighbor's door closing somewhere far enough away to feel normal again. And there was no sign left of what had gathered there earlier, no trace of the pressure that had once filled the space. Naomi turned back into the room, the sunlight following her movement, catching the edges of the furniture, the quiet order of everything exactly where it belonged, and she walked past the door without stopping, without checking it, without needing to confirm what she already knew. Her hand brushed lightly against the back of a chair as she moved, a simple contact, grounding, real, and she continued toward the hallway, disappearing into the deeper part of the house where the lights softened and the shadows stretched longer. The living room remained behind her, still, unchanged, the curtain moving gently in the breeze, the photograph holding its place on the wall, the device resting quietly on the table. And in that space, there were no voices, no commands, no authority pressing in, only the quiet, steady presence of a line that had been held without force, without noise, leaving behind nothing but the calm weight of something understood without ever needing to be said.